The one thing I keep yelling at people at the moment, which is that you don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't need fixing. And for my high achievers who are constantly looking for a hack or a way to be better, reframe breathwork not as a way to slow down, but actually the greatest productivity hack you'll ever find. Because when you actually slow down and find some balance, you'll be much more creative and productive than you currently are. Because right now you're running at 70%, 365 days a year, and you could be running at 100% on the days where it really counts.
My guest today is Jamie Clements. Jamie is a breathwork facilitator, speaker, educator, and the founder of The Breath Space. Drawing from functional breathing, modern neuroscience, trauma-aware practice, psychology, and ancient wisdom, Jamie helps people move from anxiety, burnout, and disconnection toward greater regulation, awareness, and meaning. Jamie's journey into breathwork began through his own experience with anxiety and panic attacks. What started as a personal search for healing became a wider mission to make breathwork accessible, practical, and deeply human. But Jamie is also an important critical voice within modern wellness. He challenges the pressure to constantly improve, measure, heal, and optimize ourselves, and asks whether the wellness industry is sometimes reinforcing the very anxiety and inadequacy it claims to solve. Today, we explore the science of breathing, nervous system regulation, anxiety, altered states, and limits of self-optimization, and how the breath can help us reconnect with ourselves in a culture that constantly tells us we are not enough. It's quite hot today where I am, and so I have a fan on in the room, so I hope that the sound in the background is not too disturbing, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation. This episode is brought to you by BioLongevity Supplements. Did you know that supplements are a $70 billion annual market in the US, with more than half of all American adults estimated to be taking at least one supplement every day? But according to a recent FDA review, nearly 3/4 of all American supplement manufacturers failed at least one regulatory requirement during safety inspection. With so many supplement manufacturers promising so many things, how do you know which company to trust with your own personal health? Thankfully, there is a supplement provider that prioritizes transparency and verification with every formulation. BioLongevity Supplements is changing the game by offering supplements and bioregulators with the highest quality ingredients in the right dosages and complete production transparency from batch to bottle. Too many supplement providers will say you're getting one thing and then water it down or stuff it with chemical fillers. And good luck finding out where and how it was made. BioLongevity Supplements leans on rigorous science to provide high-quality ingredients in dosages that make a real difference. The company guarantees 99% purity and provides third-party testing and certificates of authenticity for every supplement formulation. If you're looking for a trusted American supplement provider with high-quality, science-backed formulations that actually work, look no further than BioLongevity Supplements. Visit biolongevitysupplements.com and use code Claudia20 for 20% off your first order. That's bio, longevity supplements with an S at the end.com, promo code Claudia20, CLAUDIA20. Friends, a quick word from me, Claudia. Everything I do here comes from one belief, that there's so much more we can do to protect our health and particularly our brains than most of us are ever told. So I put the first steps into one simple free guide, my 5-minute brain blueprint. 5 science-backed habits, 5 minutes a day to help clear the fog, sharpen your focus, and protect your mind for the long run. It's completely free. Go to longevity-and-lifestyle.com/brain or tap the link in the show notes. Now back to today's episode. Jamie, welcome to the Longevity and Lifestyle podcast. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. No, I'm super excited to be here. It's a pleasure.
We're delighted, and we're both managing heat conditions with lack of air conditioning. So your audience, if we look a little bit sweaty, or if I do, please excuse it. So it is what it is. Jamie, I had the pleasure of hearing you speak at a conference, and I was so inspired that I wanted to bring you on today. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I'd love for you to share a little bit before we talk about the science, your story, right? And so you've spoken openly about experiencing anxiety and panic attacks. So what was happening at that time of your life? What was going on? that led you to then discover breathwork. Can you share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting. Kind of the story really feels so familiar to me now. And I've heard other people's versions of the same story as lots of people who come to this work have experienced, I guess, their own rock bottoms and burnouts and have found their way to a different way of being and existing. For me, as you mentioned, I experienced a variety of challenges with my mental health through my late teens and my early 20s. So from about the age of 15, but perhaps even a little bit before, I had some challenges with anxiety. I was quite a shy kid growing up. I was pretty introverted. And from the age of 15 until 24, 25, I had some pretty serious challenges with anxiety, with depression, with panic attacks. And I list off those kind of symptoms or experiences, and I often bring it all the way back around just to say that those for me were all a presentation of being really deeply lost and disconnected from myself. I had crafted for myself and built for myself a life from the outside looking in that probably looked relatively together, that looked pretty good. I had a good job, a good degree. I was working in the city. I was working in tech startups and previously in finance, and was playing sport to a high level. You know, I was functional. I was very, very functional. But I really feel that life for me was built from a place of who I thought I should be. And that led me off path, off track, away from what I now would describe or speak to as a deeper sense of myself or my soul. And I would say the last, I guess, 8 to 10 years of my life have been trying to make my way back there, a more true version of myself and away from some of those challenges. So yeah, it was those experiences that led me to a very deep, dark place. And from there, found breathwork and began to move into a slightly different direction and trajectory in my life.
Was it serendipitous that you found breathwork, or was there like a particular moment of rock bottom where you're like, enough is enough, I have to change, this is not me?
I was really desperate is probably the best word. I was in a really, really deep hole where I didn't know up from down, left from right. And I wasn't really sure what to do with myself. And I would say, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, that thankfully part of that rock bottom when I was 24 was losing my job. And I was running a sales team for a tech startup at the time. And it really wasn't serving me in any way, shape or form. And fortunately, obviously at the time it felt pretty harsh and unfortunate, but fortunately I got let go from that job and I ended up getting 4 months paid leave. And in those 4 months, I experienced just a different way of living. I spent a lot of time with people who were self-employed. I spent a lot of time with people who had, built things for themselves, but also who are very ingrained in the world of health and well-being and spirituality as well. And so that was really my first glimpse, I think, of a different path for myself, because for so long it had just been do well at school, go to a good university, get a good degree, get a job, work till you're 70, retire, and then you can have a life. And as it is for so many people, unfortunately. And that was the first glimpse and glimmer of something different. And then from there, breathwork came into my life just before that period. And it wasn't the first thing I thought of. It wasn't even something I was particularly aware of. I started with more traditional talk therapies. I tried meditation for a while. I tried yoga for a little while, and really just like ticked the boxes of the things that people try when they're in a pretty dark place. And then breathwork just gradually nudged itself into frame. And I was like, as I hear from so many people, breathing,
I know. I do it anyway.
I do it all the time. I know how to breathe. And eventually I found myself in the room. I found myself on the mat. I found myself having a really beautiful, very embodied experience. And that was the beginning of a path of a couple of years of deepening my personal practice and beginning to train and understand. And really, I had this deep fascination for the work that was helping me so significantly in my own life as well. Yeah, it really, I would say, was pretty serendipitous, but looking at, I suppose, the path that I shifted onto, it was always going to emerge at some point. I just don't think I could ever have expected it to emerge in the way that it has as both a personal practice, but also a career. And I don't even like to call it a career, but a career. Yeah.
Your daily passion or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
And I mean, I'd almost say, Jamie, like, you're lucky at 24 to have had that awakening, whereas other people are like slogging for years and they're burnt out in their like 40s or 50s or whatever. And then only they're like, okay, finally I need to do something. So well done for being so courageous and taking that step at such a point. And I mean, I don't know, my audience will know a little bit, but I also went into finance, investment banking, 100+ hour weeks, and then tech serial entrepreneur, and like burn, 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 burn. And thinking can sleep when you're dead, embarrassingly. And that at some point, like just, it doesn't work anymore. And that sets you on the journey. So it took me a few years longer than you. But the journey since has been so amazing. And even looking back, if you think about the person that you used to be and now, like it's such a gift. So really excited to dig into different things. And so I think most people think about breathing. And I was looking at the statistic that we breathe on average 20,000 times a day. It was like a huge number, right? But obviously most of us don't think about our breath. And so what would you say are some of the biggest misunderstandings about the power of breath, just to set the stage and help people to understand why this is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that that number of 20,000 is creeping up and up and up with rates of stress and anxiety and nervous system health going the way that it is right now. I always like to give a broad range of sort of 20 to 30,000 because I think we'll see that continue to climb, hopefully start to fall if the wellness world and breathwork does its job. However, maybe we can come back to that as a different
That's
thread
a clinical
entirely.
trial for you to do. I get people down to
Exactly.
15,000 breaths a day.
Exactly. That would be lovely to see. So I think that the biggest one is something we've alluded to already, which is just this fundamental capacity that we seem to have to take the breath for granted. So the simplicity of it is both its superpower and its downfall. So simple so that we can all access it. We can all gain the power of it. However, as we already spoke to, people just look at it and go, yeah, it's just breathing. How powerful could it possibly be? And the answer is incredibly. And so that for me is the big one, is really, if nothing else, my mission is to remind people of the power that it has. I often get introduced by my friends as, this is Jamie, he teaches people how to breathe. And I would say, yes, but, I actually don't take myself too literally in that sense. It's more reminding people of the power of the breath and also the sanctity of the breath. I'm a big advocate of looking at ancient wisdom and going, okay, breath work as this neatly wrapped modality was never needed. It was never required because there was this implicit understanding that the breath is sacred. And I think that's another one that I always try and bring into this conversation, is that the breath is the root of the word spirit in so many of these ancient cultures. And they have a lot of crossover in the etymology. And so this real deep understanding and appreciation for what is a very fundamental life process. And then from there, all of the things that it can give to us in terms of, mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and physical health. And so if I had to pick one, misunderstanding, it would be just this underestimation of the breath and us taking it for granted, and just gently reminding people of the power that it can hold.
I think that's also fascinating. And I want to look at the science a little bit and then look at different factors. But just to touch on sort of the ancients, what have you seen, or what were certain practices in which cultures that had a breathing practice? I mean, it sounds a bit funny because obviously everybody was breathing, but that were doing conscious breath, or however you want to call it.
For sure. Probably the most famous or widely acknowledged would be in yogic traditions. So with pranayama, which obviously informs a huge amount of the yogic breathing practices that we see today and has informed a lot of what we would call breath work in the Western world now. But there are also indigenous African cultures and practices, Central American, South American, Amazonian practices. There's Tumo breathing, which is a Tibetan practice, which is actually the foundation of what most people will probably know as the Wim Hof method, or Wim Hof breathing is from Tumo breathing from Tibetan traditions. And so, there are, I suppose, echoes of these ancient practices in what we see as kind of these modern breathing interventions. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that none of this stuff is new, even if the branding says otherwise. But really at its core, and something that I see in my own practice and try and infuse into my own work nowadays, is really just looking at the breath as the connection between your internal world and the external world. And so that in of itself is profound, even before we get into the realms of techniques as well. So really just trying to restore that simple but very sacred aspect to what it means to breathe.
That's really beautiful. And I'd love to tap into that a little bit more. For someone maybe hearing that the first time, connecting your outer world and your inner world. Yes, it goes into the lungs, but like, what do you mean, Jamie? Can you expand on that?
I will do my best. What do I mean by that? I suppose that there's some beautiful lines that crop up in various teachings and meditations and that I use in, I suppose, this symbiotic relationship between ourselves and nature. And this idea that we've become very separate from nature. We view ourselves as separate from nature when really we are just part of this ecosystem, and taking us away from that quite separatist mindset into more of an ecological mindset. And so some of my favorite lines that I always like to come back to around sort of, as I inhale, the universe exhales. As I exhale, the universe inhales, and just really helping us, get to grips with the fact that essentially the breath for me is this crack in the window between what's going on inside of me and what's going on outside of me. And we could go deeper into conversations around consciousness and way down the rabbit hole. But I think given that we're talking through the lens of someone listening to this for the first time, really just as they sit here, right now, just an acknowledgement, and whether that acknowledgement can turn into an appreciation or a gratitude for the fact that, that's a first principle truth, that as I breathing in all of this out here, and as I breathe out, I'm contributing to it. And that for me gives me a real sense of connection and drops that sense of separation that can often keep us feeling quite isolated in our own space.
That's so beautiful. And I definitely want to dig into the consciousness part, but we'll get to that maybe a little bit later, because this is where the juicy stuff is for me. But as we go on a little journey to get to consciousness, can we have a look first around a little bit the science part of it for some of our people understanding? So if someone is consciously breathing, what is actually happening physiologically with the nervous system and the brain and heart and stress response? Can you walk us through that for the more brained people amongst us?
Yeah, if they're still listening, that is after me talking too much about separation and consciousness. Exactly. So if you're still with us.
Yeah, welcome if you are.
Yeah, thank you for sticking around. So this for me is really the gateway into bringing everyone on this journey of the breath. And the fundamental principle that I think everyone should understand is the role of the breath within the nervous system. So the breath is part of something called the autonomic nervous system, which governs all of our automatic functioning. So things like saliva production, pupil dilation, digestion, breath, heart rate, and many, many others. The breath is quite unique as a part of that system because it's the only part that we can actively, consciously control. And so through shifting the breath, the speed of the breath, the depth of the breath, the volume at which we breathe, we can actually start to influence the nervous system. So our breath is influenced by that nervous system, but also we can reverse engineer it and influence the nervous system with the breath. And so we have this remote control or this lever or this dial to work with the autonomic nervous system, which is important because the autonomic nervous system governs that stress response that you mentioned. So it governs both stress, but also relaxation. So the most sort of widely accepted kind of fundamental model of that system is this two-branch model of sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic being fight, flight, that activation, mobilization response, and then parasympathetic being rest and digest. And so through the breath, we have the tools, the capabilities to either activate and actually turn up the intensity and the energy in the system, or probably more widely needed and also spoken about is that activation of the calm within the system. So removing or reducing the amount of energy in the system to create a deeper sense of rest and calm. So that's really the core nuts and bolts of the science when it comes to why should we care about the breath? And I think that for me is the big one, is just the influence that it can have to create our own internal reality and external reality through working with the nervous system.
I think it's really powerful. And a lot of people think they just want to calm themselves with breath, but it's actually a really useful tool. If you're going on stage or you need to be switched on and sharp, there are different breathing practices, and I'd love for you to share some of them to, switch on to get your brain fired up so that you're ready to go. I think Tony Robbins is probably one of the biggest, where he's jumping on a trampoline and doing breath work and all these crazy things, and then comes out on full power, versus obviously when we want to wind down, calm, because many of us live in this hyper fight or flight states during the day. So it's finding the balance, and it's not saying one is particularly better than the other, but I think it's managing them, right?
Absolutely. It's kind of being able to map your own internal state. I think that's kind of phase one. Is a lot of us are living very kind of neck up, and we're very identified with thought, but not so much with felt sensation. And if I were to ask somebody, where are you at right now? What are you feeling? You might think, I think I'm feeling this. I go, okay, but what are you feeling? And to actually get people really back in their bodies and connected to their internal state. And then from there, once we have that ability moment to understand where we're at, that's where we can start to apply these different protocols and practices to create change. So it might be, I often think with something like public speaking, there's absolutely a time and a place for a bit of a Tony Robbins approach if I'm feeling a bit sluggish, a little bit lethargic, and I need to get switched on. And equally, there'll be times where I'm feeling a little bit more nervous, a little bit more anxious, and I might just need to find a slightly more balanced place. And we'll all have, it might not always be public speaking, but we'll have difficult conversations or stressful days or whatever it might be. And we can just start to subtly work with the breath to create those micro shifts and those micro pauses as well.
Beautiful. And I want to touch on one of the topics, CO2, so carbon dioxide tolerance and resilience. And obviously resilience is a phenomenal thing to be able to have. I've had a professor from Stanford talk about resilience and the importance in life. Can you share a little bit about CO2 tolerance and resilience?
Yeah, it's an interesting one and does allow us to go a little bit deeper into the science. I think, again, probably one of the big misunderstandings when it comes to breath and respiration is the role of carbon dioxide in our system. Certainly when I was at school, kind of low-level biology class, was this understanding that, breath was all about oxygen in, CO2 out. CO2 being a waste gas, it's not good for us, just get rid of it. If that were true, and it was just sort of oxygen good, CO2 bad, then I would be encouraging everybody to breathe as much as possible. Like breathe as big, as fast as you possibly can, because we've got to get that oxygen in and that CO2 out. And a lot of the schools of thought, the deeper we go into understanding the breath is, the healthier we are, the less we breathe, and the less that we breathe, the healthier we are. And so to bring it back around to CO2 plays quite a vital role in oxygen delivery. So it's actually responsible for creating the internal conditions through blood pH to trigger the release of oxygen from the red blood cells into the tissues that need it. So oxygen gets bound to the hemoglobin, to the red blood cells, and it will stay bound until the pH is at a level where the release is triggered. And so CO2 actually helps to create those conditions. So that's really the fundamental science of it, is actually breathing less than we may think, breathing more lightly, more gently at a lower volume, so that we retain a level of CO2 in the system. To go a bit deeper into that and to bring it to resilience. So the way that we can start to train CO2 tolerance and also what we might call air hunger tolerance, air hunger being this urge to breathe, is primarily through breath holding. So we do short, medium, or longer breath holds to create this rise in CO2, which again is a bit of a misunderstanding. We often think that feeling of needing to breathe is as a result of needing oxygen, but it's actually CO2 rising in our system. And so when we bring CO2 and hold our breath and bring the CO2 level in our system up, we are starting to train both the body and the mind to be able to tolerate higher levels of CO2 in the system. This can benefit us both in terms of our sort of natural day-to-day breathing pattern and also mental and emotional resilience. So there's a bit of a transferable skill here where my capacity to tolerate this rising feeling of air hunger in my system is really stress resilience training, where I'm learning to stay calm in the face of fear, stress, or pressure. And so it's a really fascinating part of the breath world and the breath puzzle, and helps us both, really in the moment day to day with how we breathe and the state of our natural breathing pattern, but also as we go a little bit deeper into it with things like athletic performance and also resilience, as we mentioned.
How is your resilience, Jimmy? Are you cool as a cucumber no matter what? Is it like the best of the best of the best? Like, what would you say? And do you track it? I don't know. Like, I know the respiratory rate, like how many breaths per minute. I'm curious.
So I've not worn a wearable for quite a long time for various reasons. I would say my resilience is pretty solid. I like to consider myself someone who can stay calm under pressure, with a caveat that people often expect me, given the nature of my work, to be calm all the time, which I believe is one of the biggest myths of the well-being world, is that calm all the time is achievable and the right thing.
And you're human, right?
And I'm human, and if I were never feeling anger or anxiety, I'd be really concerned. But I suppose it's our response to those emotions and our capacity to hold those emotions. So that for me, I would say is pretty good, unless I'm underslept. I'd say that's where my emotional regulation and my resilience.
Was me last night, by the way. After
not
sleeping the night before. Yep.
Exactly that. Exactly that. So yeah, yesterday was that from the football? Were you up for the football?
Partly, but also the heat. And then my daughter
Yeah,
had a nosebleed, and there was like multiple
fine.
things going on that the night was a total disaster. So
Yeah.
last night
Yeah, I
was
mean, I did it
freaking
completely to myself by staying up to watch the football. So,
2
yeah,
a.m., 4 a.m. Yeah,
yesterday was not a good time.
not a happy camper.
But yeah, I'd say for me, CO2 tolerance is definitely a part of that, and I feel
Mhm.
that I've worked with my system in that way over the years to cultivate that capacity. And by no means, I've worked with some very, very impressive people from elite sport and free diving, and they blow my mind in terms of what they're capable of. So I'd say I'm just a normal guy, but I also enjoy this work. I'm passionate about this work, and I like to think that I hold myself pretty well.
Friends, jumping in again because I really don't want you to miss this. Taking care of our brain is one of the true cornerstones of living at our best. Our memory, our focus, our joy, all of it. And it's deeply personal for me. I watched my own mother go down the path of dementia, and the hardest part was learning that the tools that could have helped came too late for her. I don't want that for you or your loved ones. So I put the first steps into one simple free guide, my 5-minute brain blueprint. 5 science-backed habits, 5 minutes a day to help clear the fog, sharpen your focus, and protect your mind for the long run. It's completely free. Go to longevity-and-lifestyle.com/brain or tap the link in the show notes. Now back to today's episode. Amazing. Free diving, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, I scuba dive, but like going down where you can't even see anymore, I think that would be one of my
Hmm.
biggest nightmares. So anyway, different conversation.
Yeah.
For people, Jamie, listening who are wondering about their breath before we dig into different modalities of breath work, how can you tell if you're not breathing well or properly? What's like a straightaway telltale sign?
I say probably the most telltale sign would be symptomology of that. So first and foremost, it's likely to present as stress or anxiety. And this isn't really just a one direction kind of process. So stress and anxiety will create what we call dysfunctional breathing. Dysfunctional breathing will create stress and anxiety. So we've got this kind of vicious cycle. But if I was asking someone to really pay greater attention to their natural breathing pattern, then the things that we would typically see would be shallow breathing, so upper chest breathing, vertical breathing. So as someone inhales, the shoulders really come up, everything moves upward. And so we're into these kind of upper portions of the lungs, again, very shallow, fast breathing rate. So again, coming back to respiratory rate over time, mouth breathing, particularly at night, unconscious breath holding. So there was a term that got coined in lockdown around COVID called email apnea, which was people holding their breath while they're at their laptop. And that's partly postural, but primarily, in my opinion, stress related. And so if we're very, very stressed, we will start to hold our breath. And then you get people kind of not realizing they're doing it. And then all of a sudden they go and taking a really big breath. And it's just, again, creating stress on the system. But yeah, I'd say the speed of the breath, the kind of depth of the breath. So are we more diaphragmatic or are we more upper chest with the intercostals? Unconscious breath holding and mouth breathing would be like the big repeat offenders as far as breathing in a way that isn't really supportive for our well-being.
Interesting. And also sleep apnea is known for being a driver of dementia, Alzheimer's, right? So it's actually
Yeah,
important to
exactly.
address. Yeah.
Exactly. Mouth breathing in children has been starting to be shown to be linked to things like ADHD, cognitive challenges in later life as well. So there's a big link between mouth breathing in particular and cognitive function over time. It's primarily to do with oxygen delivery to the brain and oxygenation of the brain.
Yeah. Do you know Patrick McKeown? I've had him on a few times. Yeah, he's brilliant. And I've tried mouth tape. I've even had my kids too. But I find like I don't consciously think I breathe through my mouth at night. But if I use the mouth tape, I do sometimes notice like a difference. And he has obviously this Myo tape and there's different brands out there. It's interesting concept, his mouth tape, but it is effective. So I think if anyone's curious, just try it, right? So you're not going to look the best, but it's quite effective. Jamie, let's look at the pyramid of breathwork modalities. Can you walk us through sort of the basics that you would say, everybody should try? Are there any contraindications? Are there any people that shouldn't be doing this? I think that's also important. And then as it gets a little bit more technical, like what does that look like? What are the outcomes? What are the experiences? Can you walk us through the landscape?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I often speak to both this idea of the pyramid, but also this kind of spectrum. So spectrum flowing from micro at one end through to macro at the other end. And so, which gives me weird kind of flashbacks to studying economics and microeconomics and macroeconomics. So I haven't thought about that for a while, but micro through to micro being the foundations, some of the stuff we were just speaking to, really, the foundations of what it means to breathe well day to day. So a lot of Patrick's work does a lot of really great groundwork around functional breathing, CO2 tolerance. How are you breathing day to day? Are you firstly even aware of it? And secondly, doing it in a way that is supportive of how you think, feel, operate in the world around you. And so that's where I would start most people, is first pay attention, and second, learn the basics. So the basics of healthy functional breathing would be breathing through the nose, breathing slowly, breathing expansively with the belly, and breathing softly and gently. So really the opposite of those things that we would look out for with dysfunctional breathing. So slow it down, breathe through the nose, breathe deeply, and breathe gently. And so that would be kind of, it can, and often for many people could be and should be, a dedicated practice of checking in with the breath and working with it to move towards that pattern. Then we get kind of into the middle of that spectrum, which is around the nervous system. Again, that principle that we spoke to around the role of the breath within the nervous system. Some of these famous now techniques, things like box breathing, physiological sigh, and exhale breathing, where you might be spending 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20, 30 minutes doing a sequence of practices or a particular practice that is designed to create a change in the state of your nervous system. So this might be a daily practice in the morning, in the evening, throughout the day. It can also be in the moment practice to support you with a feeling of stress, anxiety, insomnia, low energy, low mood, whatever it might be. And so kind of moving along in terms of the length of session, the depth of understanding, all the way through to this macro end of the spectrum where we find the more therapeutic modalities of breathwork, things like conscious connected breathing, where we're starting to work with more of a therapeutic, emotional, and spiritual lens, where we're able through the breath to create these expanded or altered states of consciousness for psychosomatic processing, for healing, for trauma resolution. And really, this is where, certainly when I first got into this work, somebody kind of explained that to me, and I was like, "Nah, you've definitely lost me now. You're telling me that through breath I can create these, near psychedelic experiences." And they're going, "Yeah, just give it a try." And now that is where I spend, I would say, the majority of my time in my work is facilitating those deeper practices. That being said, my way of working with those deeper practices is always to support them with a solid foundation and base that are formed by those first two pillars, to really give that scaffolding to hold the depth of these deeper experiences. So yeah, sort of 3 pillars of functional breathing, nervous system regulation, and then conscious connected breathwork and therapeutic practices.
So we're going to dig into the conscious connected breath.
Yeah.
And maybe just to caveat, obviously the foundations with the breathing, but maybe just to touch on trauma and trauma release. I've had the opportunity to do some of these holotropic breathing experiences, and it's unbelievable with your breath what you can actually do in the right environment. And so I'd love for you to talk through that a little bit, but maybe just a caveat with how this can also trigger, unresolved trauma that people might have. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that the risk is also the reward in a lot of cases with this work, in the sense that in the right space, with the right facilitator, with the right preparation and integration, we are using the breath to open a window to some of those deeper layers of the psyche and the unconscious and the body. And in doing so, we may bring up past experiences, memories, or material that is challenging or has previously been challenging. And so that's where, again, the right circumstances, the right formulation, the right people in the room is incredibly important, because when that material resurfaces and we almost have this opportunity to recalibrate our relationship to it, the depth of the felt sense of safety that we have in that space is what allows us to recalibrate it in the positive sense. If we just kind of bash down that door to the psyche and say, good luck, God bless, it really leaves the window open to something that unfortunately we see more and more in the breathwork space, which is destabilization and re-traumatization. And so that's where it's just breathing becomes quite a challenging thing to navigate, because we don't quite take it as seriously in a lot of spaces as I believe we need to. I think the beauty of the practice is that it's incredibly universal, but there are contraindications. And as we just discussed, there are real things that we need to manage in terms of some of the material that could come to the surface. So it's an amazing thing. It really, really is. And I don't want to sound all doom and gloom, but I think it's really just the level of responsibility that we have to hold these practices in the right way, in the same way we would speak to harm reduction in psychedelic spaces as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I've had different practitioners and scientists around psychedelic medicine that are, in different jurisdictions where it's allowed. And that set and setting is so fundamental, and that feeling of safety, right? So I think if, you feel more vulnerable and you're not feeling safe, it can trigger a whole cascade of things. So I think what you said, make sure it's a safe space with someone who knows actually what they're doing, because you are essentially opening up the subconscious partially during these experiences. And maybe for someone who hasn't heard any of this before and they're thinking like subconscious and opening up and like, what are they talking about? Can you describe one of your experiences or whatever you're comfortable, maybe one of the people you've worked with, obviously no names. What can someone who's never heard of this and they're listening and they're like, what? Breath and consciousness and like journeys and like, what's going on? Can you walk through that?
Yeah, I would always say that the words will never quite do the experience justice, but I would definitely endeavor to do my best. So maybe we can kind of paint a bit of a picture of a typical experience. Anywhere between 30 and 90 minutes of a particular style of breath work where you're working with the breathing in a very intentional way, where we are increasing the volume, depth, and rate of breathing, usually breathing in and out through the mouth. And when we breathe in that way over a sustained period of time, we're creating a shift in our blood biochemistry, notably dropping blood CO2 levels. And this opens up a sort of cascade of physiological and psychological experiences that lead to, not in every case, but lead to an experience of an altered state of consciousness that can show up very differently from person to person and session to session. So it can be quite a physical experience. People get changes in temperature, energy moving in the body. Some people get sort of cramping and tingling in the hands. There's really like a variety of physical experiences
Had
that
that too.
can
Yeah.
manifest. It can be a very emotional experience for people that can often be linked to some of that unconscious material and memories and things coming through. Other times it seems to be more of a processing of emotional energy that's been held and stored somewhere in the body or the unconscious. And so one thing you quite often hear will be, I felt this movement of anger, but I don't know where it was coming from. And quite often it's this very visceral letting go of an old sort of stagnant emotion that's been held somewhere. It can be a little bit more traditionally psychedelic, so colors and geometry, your imagination coming online as well. And sometimes for some people, it's just really, really calm and meditative and peaceful. I laugh because people often come out the other side. Maybe the person next to them was crying, maybe the person next to them was laughing, and they've just had this beautiful, peaceful journey. And they're like, did I do it wrong? I'm like, for me, that is the best experience. It doesn't need to be this huge process if we're in this beautiful space of contentment. I'd say one of my most profound experiences with conscious connected breathing, I've heard many, but one of the ones that stands out, and it was actually the single experience where the very next week I sat down with the facilitator and I said, how would I even think about going about training and facilitating for other people? So this experience for me was a big one. And the thing that stood out for me, there were different images coming into my mind, but I had this very visceral felt experience of joy and euphoria that I was probably 23 at this point, and I remember being in that experience and even afterwards thinking that was an experience of joy that I hadn't had since I were a kid. And it was almost like that I'd forgotten that level of joy were possible. And it was this really blunt force reminder that it was possible. And that then stayed with me and really opened up my emotional capacity to feel the higher highs and arguably the lower lows, but definitely the higher highs. So that was a really standout one for me. And I've seen all manner of experiences over the last 6-7 years. Yeah, it's been a really beautiful thing to witness in others. It's a gift to be able to share this with other people for sure.
Facilitated too. I know the first person who ever told me about this, he's like, it's crazy. He was like, this is the most insane thing. I think he randomly ended up in one of these breathwork sessions, had no idea what he was getting into. And he's like, I literally resaw being born. He was like, it was so wild. He was totally like freaked out and excited about it at the same time. So I think it's set and setting is super important, and that people are prepared for what they're getting themselves into, because you're not really sure what's going to come up, right? So beautiful. I also wanted to discuss people who are like the high performers, right? Addicted to optimization, tracking more, optimizing. You touched on something before that I really liked about helping people. You asked, like, how do you feel? And they're all cerebral about their answer. What is that path for high performers, for people to be less cerebral and to tap into feeling more? And why should a high performer care about that? Why should that be important for everyone?
That's the big question in my work. I suppose the why should you care? Because the thing I rub up against the most with type A, high performing types is this sense that I don't want to lose my edge. You know, if I slow down, if I'm happier, if I'm, fulfilled, then I'm going to lose my edge. And actually, if we look at, and this is something I always have to remind myself of, because I'm definitely cut from that cloth, that you look at these incredibly wealthy people, or people who have sold companies, or people who have achieved all of the things that they said they were going to achieve. None of them are going, oh yeah, when I did that one, everything was fine. I was finally happy when I finally got there. It's the illusion of there. It's like, when I get to there, then everything will make sense. And you can be wildly wealthy and incredibly fulfilled. You can also be doing just fine and wildly fulfilled. And I think the difference there is nothing, to do with reaching there, but actually a deeper appreciation of here. And that starts, I think, with coming back into felt sensation. And so working with lots of people from that world, for me, it comes from two core places. One, when we are in constant motion and in that chronic stress state and overdrive to achieve, rest feels like a risk. It feels very confronting. I can't rest, or I don't want to rest. And there's a lot of resistance to it. And one side of it is that the nervous system has found a new comfort zone in chaos. So rest, actually slowing down. I'm now confronted by all of this stuff I've been ignoring. And so I go, oh, I'm not going to slow down. I'll just keep going. I'll put my fingers in my ears. And then the other one is about our sense of worth, ultimately our sense of self-worth. And when in our lives did we begin or when did we learn in our lives that our worth as a human being was based on what we were achieving, what we were outputting, what we were ticking off?
It's a big thing for me, by the way. Yeah, it had to be the
Me
best and
too.
more. And
Me too. I think it's
a journey.
It is a journey, and also having a level of, I suppose, appreciation for those parts of ourselves, because I like the fact that I'm driven. I know that it can tip a little bit too far sometimes, where I'm pushing because I feel like I need to be somebody or prove something. And I believe that there is a version of ambition that exists beyond those parts of ourselves that need to prove something. And when we get to this place of deep or deeper self-acceptance, we can start to create from a more loving place, both for ourselves and other people, rather than more of kind of a lacking place where I'm like, oh, I need to show everybody how good I am, or I need to help everybody, or whatever it might be. And so working with the nervous system to recalibrate our relationship to rest, and working with the psyche to recalibrate our relationship with the parts of ourselves that feel like they have something to prove. And I think those two together are a really powerful combo for anyone who feels like they've achieved lots of things, but they still feel exactly the same, which I know is a lot of people.
Yeah, the goalposts keep moving. Would you say that I have to be careful of my wording, because it's not you've made it, right? That's not the right word. But is it when you are acting from a sense of purpose? So it's not trying to prove, but it's actually that this is your purpose. And typically when we get to a larger purpose, it's typically something that's greater than ourselves. So it's not to do with the ego, but actually in service of others.
I'll speak from my personal experience. And what I say is that I believe it becomes a lot easier from that place. So feeling connected to something greater, something bigger than yourself, there is a sense of being pulled rather than having to push. That being said, we are often, a lot of us, wired the way we are wired. And so I've even seen in my own journey where parts of myself sneak back in, where it's like, it's purpose, but I've got to be the best at my purpose. And so I'm not immune to sliding back into that place and going on. And the tricky part with service and purpose is, if I were working in a job I hated, then, I could clock off at a certain time and not think too much about it. But because I love what I do and I love having an impact and I love helping people, I really feel passionately about it. It's quite challenging at times to find that space to go, okay, let's down tools for a little bit, because there's always something to do and I enjoy it. And so I have to look very carefully at those parts of myself just to make sure that the fuel source is coming from the right place and that I'm operating from a place of regulation in my pursuit of my purpose as well. So yeah, it's fun. I find that part quite fun to play with those dials.
So well said, Jamie. And I need advice on this because I could be busy 24/7 and I love what I do and I love all the different things and I have an addictive personality and I'm like, just one more thing, let's get it done. What's your secret to finding that balance? And do you set up guardrails to say, like, past a certain time, let's, close the computer, it's off, limits, or how do you manage that? Is there any structure you bring in or protocol?
I've tried to build my life and my work in such a way where a mentor of mine called it not work-life balance, but work-life harmony. And this actually, it's a completely different paradigm to work-life balance, which is very much the 9 to 5 paid leave kind of way of operating, because there are guardrails and barriers where it's like, okay, I know that I'm in work these times, so my balance will be out of those times. Whereas this can infuse and bleed into every hour of every waking and sleeping hour of your life. If you're not careful. So by no means have I got it nailed, but the way that I try and operate is through that lens and going, on any given day, whether it's a Saturday, whether it's a Wednesday, whether it's a Monday, weekend or otherwise, would I be able to take this day off if I needed to? And so, give a very real-time example. I messed up last week because I led a 2-day retreat on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I had meetings in London on Thursday. I know from all of the evidence I have over the last 6-7 years that the day after a retreat, I'm wrecked. I don't want to be around people. I just need to sleep, be in nature. And by the end of Thursday, because I had a few meetings in London, I was irritable. I was overtired. I was like, this is not a nice feeling. And just taking it as information to go, I've not done this well. And so really starting to tune into that kind of information and building the rules that support that, and giving myself kind of spaciousness to go in either direction. So it might be I've got a day that I've blocked out for myself as a day off, and I wake up in the morning and I feel super inspired and super creative. And so I choose to do some work. And it might be that I wake up and I've got some work that needs doing and I'm just not in a space to do it because I'm feeling wrecked. And so I take that day off. And just really for me, that's how we stop ourselves from becoming martyrs in the pursuit of our own purpose. And the thing that underpins all of this for me is finite games versus infinite games. And knowing that even with the pursuit of this purpose, there's no there that I'm trying to reach. Like, I can't complete my purpose. Day by day, I will work towards the things that work for me and work for the thing that I am building. But I'm under no illusion that, there's no end point in sight. And I want to be in a position to work for as long as I am able to, and not to reach that point where I'm like, God, I'm so glad I'm able to retire, but actually to have a life that I don't need to retire from because it has this beautiful harmony. So that's really, I guess, my philosophy as to how I try and approach this stuff.
I love it. And I hear you too. People are like, oh, when I retire. And for me, it's just such a foreign concept. I was like, why would you not be doing something that you love so much that you wouldn't want to leave it? Like, what's the point? But everyone's wired a little bit differently. And I think one of my learnings along the journey was also compassion. Some people call it grace, and not having to be perfect all the time and not like push, and just realize that like there are going to be days when you wake up and you know what, you're just feeling exhausted. And if you can sit down at your desk and try to do work, it's going to take 2 hours that normally would take you maybe 30 minutes, right? So instead, walk in nature, breathe, have a nap, whatever, to recalibrate and then try again. And you were talking about recovery, like that was really hard for me to accept. I was like, this is not productive. I need to be doing something more. So realizing that, and that actually some of the greatest ideas happen not in front of the computer, but actually out walking, doing sports with friends in conversation and things like that too. So I think it's reevaluating. It's part of self-love, I think, but it's also reevaluating actually the goal that happens when you're not in the traditional work mode, work sense, I think too. So were some of the things I learned. Yeah.
I would also say on that, just a final thing, which is something that I say to anybody who asks me about getting into breathwork as a career, which is that your relationship to the thing will shift when it becomes part of your work. So when you first discover breathwork and you fall in love with it and it does so much for you, there's a purity there that, if you don't feel like you need to, then you don't actually have to make it any kind of side hustle or anything like that. And I understand the drive to want to do that as well. But just knowing that making your energy towards the thing you love sustainable is important. Otherwise, you will grow to resent it. And I literally had a call with a mentor of mine this afternoon. He said, too much is still too much, even when it's too much good. Like too much good and too much bad are still too much. And so that's where management of kind of that sustainability of energy is really, really important for me in my work, which is like, sure, I could do 5 workshops a day, 52 weeks a year, and I would be burnt out and I would end up resenting the work, resenting the thing that I used to love. And so really striking that balance and going, it's because I love it doesn't mean it doesn't have to consume you. So yeah, it's a really important factor for sure.
That's really important. Before we finish up today, Jamie, can you share about the breath space, what you've created in this world?
For sure. Yeah. The breath space is, I suppose, the formulation of all things breathwork that I have done over the last few years. So in person and online, I have my app and online courses. I have in-person retreats, workshops, corporate experiences, many, many different parts of that world. But yeah, that for me is a hybrid community of people that are fascinated by breathwork or passionate about breathwork or looking to find their way through the world of breathwork in a world that is increasingly online. Proud to say that the in-person side of it is the most important to me and the most exciting for me in the world right now.
Yeah. And I saw some statistic, I don't remember the exact details, but it was one of the biggest sectors of growth in the huge wellness industry of in-person, right? And social connection, especially in the world of AI and all the rest of it too. So well done that you're doing these beautiful things. And where would you send people who are curious to check it out, to see your courses? Where should they go, Jamie? And we'll link it in the show notes.
I would direct people to thebreathspace.co.uk, and probably my Instagram is the best place to find out everything that I'm up to as well. And then I will also, where are we now for summer, early next year, or probably end of this year for pre-order, I'll have my book coming out as well. So there's, more to come.
Very exciting. And your Instagram handle for people wondering?
Yeah, it's Jamie Clements _. So just my full name and then an underscore.
Beautiful. What are some parting thoughts or wisdom or piece of advice for people who are chronically overstressed, right? Like many of us, what would you want them to understand about breath work so that they can be at their best every day?
The one thing I keep yelling at people at the moment, which is that you don't need fixing. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't need fixing. And for my high achievers who are constantly looking for, a hack or a way to be better, reframe breathwork not as a way to slow down, but actually the greatest productivity hack you'll ever find. Because when you actually slow down and find some balance, you'll be much more creative and productive than you currently are. Because right now you're running at 70%, 365 days a year, and you could be running at 100% on the days where it really counts.
Great advice. Jamie, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your wisdom for all the beautiful work you're doing in this world. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's Claudia again. Before you take off, would you like to get a short email from me to you several times a month with top tips, insights, and strategies to help optimize your life, health, and business? This could be interesting posts or articles I've read on life and longevity optimization, cool biohacking or lifestyle products that I've discovered, and other fun things to help you be at your best. It's a very short piece of inspiration for you. So if you want to receive it, check it out by going to llinsider.com. That's llinsider.com and leave your email to get the next one.